بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
So the author says the fourth thing that makes the ghusl obligatory is nifas, postpartum bleeding, which linguistically is wilada, childbirth. Yani nifas is wilada. So postpartum bleeding is called nifas because it comes out after a nafas itself. Excluding puberty and iddah, it is like menstruation, yani in judgments. So there are judgments. We're going to look at some of them. Judgments about the prohibition of prayer and about, for example, sexual intercourse. So menses and postpartum bleeding share in judgments, but there are some cases where they diverge, such as the case of puberty, because puberty is determined by menses and not by postpartum bleeding. And iddah, when a woman can remarry, for a woman to track her time before she can marry again, that goes by menstrual cycles for a menstruating woman, not postpartum bleeding. So excluding puberty and iddah, postpartum bleeding is like menstruation. And we'll see some other cases where they're different. According to Al-Basir, that's because postpartum bleeding is concentrated menstrual blood. So what's the minimum of that bleeding? Its least is a minimal amount, or whatever's there, or a spit. All of that means the same thing. So that's different from menses in the Shafi'i school. That's different from menses in the Shafi'i school. You'll see. So the minimum amount of postpartum bleeding is whatever blood is there. So what that means is, for example, a woman delivered a baby. Now, let's say she delivered her baby. She's not bleeding. Apparently, it's not like exiting the postpartum bleeding, I mean. But what if she just inserted some tissue or cotton, and then she pulled it out and she could see something there, some red or some brown, which is blood. So just the fact that that's there, that means that's postpartum bleeding. So when that bleeding stops, then she needs to take a ghusl. That little bit. As long as that's inside of 15 days, Yani, she delivered her baby. Let's say she didn't see any bleeding after she delivered her baby. She needs to take a ghusl just for delivering the baby. But as long as she's still inside her 15 days after delivering that baby, if she saw any blood, that blood is postpartum bleeding. She didn't see any blood for 15 days. Why I'm talking about 15 days. If she didn't see any blood for 15 days after delivering her baby, zero blood, then she saw blood, then that's menses. So the minimum of postpartum bleeding is whatever's there. It's not the blood that comes out with the child. And it's not the blood that comes out between twins. It's the blood that comes out after delivery, after all of her babies come out. But, like we just said here, within 15 days of emptying the womb. That bleeding started within 15 days of emptying the womb of a human origin. Even without the shape of a human. But whatever was there was the origin of a human, yani, such as a blood clot or a flesh clump, such as a blood clot or a flesh clump. That which was the origin of a human, if her womb was emptied of that, and then 15 days, within 15 days of that ejection, she saw blood. What kind of blood is that? That's postpartum bleeding. Or else, if it's after 15 days, it's menses. You said, so if she saw blood for the first time on the 7th day, for example, it is considered postpartum bleeding. That's correct. Therefore, whether she delivered a live or a dead baby, complete or partial, the following blood is postpartum as long as it's inside 15 days of delivery. And Nawawi was certain about that in Al-Rawdah. It also matters not if the blood were red or yellow, or if this is the woman's first delivery or not. Its maximum is 60 days and nights, also known by Ash-Shafi'i's research, because most of the evidence for postpartum bleeding rules and menstruation rules is from research, not from Quran or Hadith. There is evidence from the Quran and evidence from the Hadith. Most of it, though, is not from there. So each madhab has its rules for menses. If the bleeding continues after 60 days, then she's in a state of istihadah, sickness bleeding. So the maximum of postpartum bleeding is 60 days and nights. So if it goes past 60 days, that means she now has sickness bleeding or defective bleeding, istihadah. Now, though, here's what you need to know very well. When did that sickness bleeding start? I'm not going to answer that right now, and I don't want you to answer. I just want you to know that's a case so that you understand here. In the case when the woman, her menses goes beyond the 15 days that we didn't talk about yet for menses, or her postpartum bleeding goes past the 60 days. So that means now she's in a sickness bleeding, a defective bleeding. But now the question is, when did it start? Because it's not the case usually that just on that 60th day, like a valve was turned and it stopped being postpartum, and then the new valve was opened and then it became sickness bleeding like that. No. When she goes bleeding into day 61 for her postpartum and into day 16 for her menses, we're going to talk about it inshallah, then really probably she already got into istihadah before that. Just the religious rule is she doesn't have to consider it as long as the days don't go over. She's not even going to deem it sickness bleeding if the days don't go over. As long as it stops at 60 days, then there's no sickness bleeding. If she goes into day 61, then there is sickness bleeding. And now the question is, when did it start? It might have started on day 50 or day 45, for example. So we're going to come, inshallah, to clarify those things. The norm for the postpartum bleeding is 40 days and nights, because of what was narrated from Salama, Prophet's wife. Radiyallahu anha, she said, the woman in her postpartum bleeding would sit for 40 days during the time of the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's what was reported about her. This does not negate more than 40 days. So then what was she talking about? If she's not talking about the maximum, then she's talking about the average by merging it with the results of the research. How come we said that's not a maximum? Because there was also research that showed otherwise. So when that's put together with the research, then the determination was that's an average. If the bleeding stops, she acts as if it has ceased. Yani, if she's still inside her 60 days. So here's the case. She saw bleeding after delivery by 15 days. Within 15-day window from delivery, she saw vaginal bleeding. So this then is postpartum bleeding. So now postpartum bleeding can go how far, how long? 60 days. 60 days from delivery. 60 days from delivery. That's 2 months. So she knows as long as she's inside of her 60 days, if that bleeding stops, it could come back and she'll still be inside of her postpartum bleeding. She has a 60-day window. As long as it doesn't stop for 15 days, which we're going to repeat, as long as it doesn't stop for 15 days and then start again, because that's going to be menses. So if the bleeding does stop, she acts as if it has ceased. Why? Because she doesn't know that it's going to come back. That means now she's going to take a ghusl, but that doesn't mean she has to take the ghusl immediately. She might wait without missing the prayer time. She might have had deliveries before, and now she knows she has a habit. Or she just might wait for whatever reason to see if more blood's going to come back without missing the prayer time. And then before the prayer goes out, if the bleeding doesn't come back, she takes her ghusl and she prays. If it does return, she considers that non-bleeding time as postpartum. The clean time when the bleeding stopped inside of her 60 days and then came back before 15 days, that clean time is still postpartum bleeding time. Still postpartum. So any prayers or fasting she did at that time is not valid, but she still has reward. If the bleeding stops before 60 days and then returns before the end of the 60-day window, and the period of cleanliness is less than 15 days, that's what we already said, then this new blood is still postpartum because it wasn't a 15-day gap. But if it stops for 15 days, then the new blood after that is menses. The fifth thing that makes ghusl obligatory is menses itself, al-hayd, which, with its rulings, is the most prominent of the three types of vaginal bleeding. It's like menses is the main vaginal bleeding. There are three kinds of vaginal bleedings: menstrual bleeding, postpartum bleeding, and defective bleeding. Linguistically, hayd means to run or flow. It is healthy vaginal bleeding for at least 24 hours over no more than 15 days. No earlier than 16 days before becoming 9 lunar years, originating from the extent of the womb and not caused by childbirth. All of that's menses. Let's unpack. So, what is hayd? It is healthy vaginal bleeding. That means it didn't come out because of sickness. For at least 24 hours. So any bleeding less than 24 hours is not menses. But over no more than 15 days, which means menses has to be at least 24 hours inside of 15 days. 24 hours inside of 15 days. It doesn't have to be 24 consecutive hours. And it can't be more than 15 days. So it is healthy vaginal bleeding for at least 24 hours over no more than 15 days. How soon can it start for a woman? No earlier than 16 days before becoming 9 lunar years. No earlier than 16 days before becoming 9 lunar years. Where does it come from? Originating from the extent of the womb. The extent of the womb means closest to the chest, furthest from the vagina. And it is not caused by childbirth, because then that would be postpartum bleeding. Saying that it's a healthy bleeding means it's not sickness bleeding, and saying that it's not caused by childbirth means it's not postpartum. So if it were less than 24 hours, that's a sickness bleeding. If it were more than 15 days, whatever is more than 15 days is sickness bleeding. And maybe some of what's before it too. So like we said, when that menstrual blood goes past 15 days, once she's in day 16, now she knows she has sickness bleeding. And the question is, when did it start? Could have started 2, 3, 4, 5 days ago, for example. It might happen while pregnant, according to the stronger saying. So there's two sayings. Could a pregnant woman menstruate? Strong saying is yes. According to the other saying that she can't, then if she had vaginal bleeding while pregnant, it would be defective bleeding. But the strong saying is that yes, a pregnant woman could menstruate, because this bleeding came within a valid time of menses. Yani, in other words, according to this strong saying, pregnancy simply does not prevent menses. So, menses can take 5 different colors. The strongest is the aswad, the black, which is really red though, but it's very intense. It's dark red, yani, the black, the aswad, which is intensely red, dark red. And it is painful or stings or burns. I think sting, yani, of course I never experienced that, but I think sting is the word. It might also be red, pink, yellow, which is weaker than what is before it, and brownish, ekdar, which is close to the color of soil, which is the weakest. Or another way to say it is what looks like this, the blood that comes out of the meat. You have meat, raw meat, and blood comes out of that. So a woman could have menses that looks like that blood, or it looks like soil, the color of soil, that is. So these are the 5 colors of menses in order of their strength. No, that's akhdar with a kha and a dad. This is akdar with a kaf and a dal. Akdar. So there's 5 colors. Here they are in their order of strength: black, red, pink, yellow, and brownish. Akdar means murky. Murky. Menstruation makes ghusl obligatory by consensus. Allah the Exalted said, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوهُنَّ حَتَّى يَطْهُرْنَ. Do not approach them until they are pure. فَإِذَا تَطَهَّرْنَ فَأْتُوهُنَّ مِنْ حَيْثُ أَمَرَكُمُ اللَّهُ. Then, when they have performed purification, approach them from whatever way Allah made lawful for you. So in this ayah, there's two things here. One is the cessation of the bleeding for the blood to stop in the first place. And the second thing is to perform a ghusl. Do not approach them until they are pure. وَلَا تَقْرَبُوهُنَّ حَتَّى يَطْهُرْنَ. Until they are pure means until the blood stops. فَإِذَا تَطَهَّرْنَ. And then when they made a ghusl, فَأْتُوهُنَّ مِنْ حَيْثُ أَمَرَكُمُ اللَّهُ. Then approach them from whatever way Allah made lawful for you. And the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, إِذَا أَقْبَلَتِ الْحَيْضَةُ فَدَعِ الصَّلَاةِ. If the menstruation came, then leave out prayer. وَإِذَا أَدْبَرَتْ فَاغْسِلِي عَنْكِ الدَّمَ وَصَلِّي. And if it goes away, wash the blood from yourself and pray. This ayah about the menses is Surah Al-Baqarah. I don't have the number of the ayah. It's Surah Al-Baqarah. You're welcome.